Picture a narrow strip of sea, barely wider than a few kilometers in places, squeezed between a small Greek island and the mainland coast near Athens. Today, that island is called Salamis, and it sits so close to Athens that a ferry ride between them takes less than half an hour. In 480 BC, this quiet stretch of water was about to become the site of one of the most consequential battles in human history. On a hillside overlooking that strait, a Persian king sits on a golden throne. He has literally brought a chair down from his camp so he can watch comfortably. Xerxes the Great rules the largest empire the ancient world has ever seen. A superpower stretching from what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan through Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Egypt, and into the edges of Europe itself. Historians estimate his empire covered close to 5 million square kilometers and ruled over tens of millions of people from dozens of different nations. Against that empire stands a loose alliance of small, quarreling Greek city-states that refuse to submit. Beneath the Persian king, in the strait, floats his fleet, over 1,000 ships. Facing them, somewhere between 300 and 400 Greek vessels wait in the water. The Greeks are outnumbered more than 2 to 1. They are exhausted. Their greatest city, Athens, sits burned and empty on the hill just behind them. Xerxes' army marched in and torched it only weeks earlier. By every reasonable measure, this battle should be over in an afternoon, and the tiny alliance of Greek cities should simply become one more province in an already enormous empire. It doesn't happen that way. By sunset, the strait will be filled with wreckage and drowned soldiers. The Persian king will flee back toward Asia in a panic, and for the next 25 centuries, historians will keep arguing about exactly how such a small, divided force outfought the greatest military machine on Earth. The closer you look, the stranger this story gets, and it starts with understanding why any of this was happening in the first place. This didn't come out of nowhere. 10 years earlier, in 490 BC, Xerxes' father, King Darius, invaded Greece to punish Athens for helping Greek cities in Asia Minor revolt against Persian rule. That invasion ended badly for Persia. A heavily outnumbered Athenian army beat Darius' forces on the beach at Marathon. Xerxes inherited the throne, the empire, and his father's unfinished grudge, and he spent years afterward building the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever assembled, determined to finish what Darius started. The new invasion began with 2 battles happening almost at once. On land, a small force, including the famous 300 Spartans, held a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae for 3 days before being overwhelmed. At nearly the same time, out at sea, the Greek and Persian fleets fought each other to a bloody standstill near the island of Euboea in a lesser-known naval clash called the Battle of Artemisium. It was here the Greeks first noticed something important. Persia's massive fleet lost its advantage the moment the water got tight and narrow. Once Thermopylae fell, the path into central Greece opened completely. Xerxes marched south, found Athens already evacuated, and burned it to the ground. With the mainland seemingly lost, the surviving Greek fleet gathered in the narrow channel next to Salamis, the very island the fleeing Athenians had used weeks earlier to ferry their families to safety, while every able-bodied man climbed aboard the warships instead. The textbook version of what happened next says the Athenian commander, Themistocles, convinced his nervous allies to fight in these cramped waters rather than retreat toward the open sea near Corinth, where more cautious commanders wanted to fall back instead. His argument was simple. A narrow strait would cancel out Persia's huge numerical advantage, because big fleets need open water to maneuver, and here there wasn't any. The story goes that the Persians sailed straight into the strait. Their larger ships crashed into each other in the chaos, and the lighter, faster Greek ships picked them apart one by one. Xerxes watched his fleet fall apart from his hillside throne, and within the year withdrew the bulk of his army from Greece entirely. It's a clean story. Narrow water, clever tactics, a smaller force winning through wit instead of size. It's also missing the one detail that makes this battle genuinely extraordinary. Here's what most retellings skip. The night before this legendary battle, the Greek alliance was on the verge of falling apart completely, with no Persian ship anywhere near them yet. Several commanders, especially the Corinthians, wanted to abandon Salamis altogether and retreat south to a defensive wall being built at the Isthmus of Corinth. To them, staying in this strait wasn't a clever trap for Persia. It was a trap for themselves. If they lost here, there would be nowhere left to retreat to, and the war would simply be over. The Strait of Salamis was losing this argument. His own allies were preparing to sail away from Salamis without a single enemy ship having entered the strait. So he did something drastic. He sent a personal servant, a man named Sicinus, across the water in a small boat, straight into the Persian camp, with a message that sounds, on its surface, like an act of betrayal. The Greek alliance is falling apart, and they intend to flee tonight. If you move now and seal off both ends of the strait, you can trap and destroy their entire fleet in one stroke. Here's where the story stops being simple. Themistocles wasn't handing his allies over to the enemy. He was engineering Xerxes' own decision-making against him. Think about what a scattering, retreating Greek fleet actually meant for Persia. If the Greeks fled toward Corinth and open water, Persia's massive numbers would finally have the room to matter, and the war could drag on for months with every advantage tilted toward the empire. What Xerxes actually needed, if he wanted one clean, total, decisive victory, was to trap the Greek fleet somewhere it couldn't escape. And that's exactly what the message told him to do. That night, Persian ships quietly moved into position, sealing off the western exit near the small island of Citylea and the eastern channel toward Eleusis. Persian soldiers were even landed on Citylea itself, ready to finish off any Greek sailors who might wash ashore there once the panicked retreat turned into a massacre. By morning, the Greek fleet that Xerxes believed was about to scatter in fear was instead fully gathered, rested, and facing an enemy that had sealed off its own way out. The argument in the Greek camp was over. There was nowhere left to retreat to, and no time left to debate it. There was only forward. The playwright Aeschylus, who most historians believe actually fought in this battle himself, wrote a play about it just 8 years later called The Persians. In it, a messenger describes the exact moment the Persian fleet realized it had sailed into a dead end with no way out. A strong sign this trap wasn't a later exaggeration, but close to what genuinely happened. Once the Persian fleet was locked inside the strait, everything Themistocles had planned for finally clicked into place. Ships packed too tightly together started colliding with each other as the battle lines compressed. Greek triremes, lighter, faster, and built for exactly this kind of tight quarters fighting, darted through the gaps and rammed hull after hull. One moment from the battle became legendary on its own. Artemisia, a queen from Halicarnassus, and one of the only female commanders in ancient naval history, found her ship cornered with no way out. Instead of surrendering, she rammed and sank a nearby allied Persian ship, tricking her Athenian pursuer into thinking she must actually be fighting for the Greek side, and escaped completely. Watching from his hillside seat, Xerxes reportedly saw the ramming, and not realizing whose ship had actually been sunk, praised her as the only commander fighting well that day. Ancient sources suggest Persia may have lost somewhere between 200 and 300 ships, compared to roughly 40 for the Greeks, numbers that should be treated as rough estimates rather than precise counts, given how ancient historians recorded casualties. Xerxes fled the scene before the battle even fully ended, reportedly afraid the Greeks might sail north and destroy his bridge of boats across the Hellespont, trapping his entire army in Europe. The real breakthrough here isn't just who tricked whom, it's why the trick worked at all. Themistocles understood that Xerxes' real weakness wasn't his fleet size, it was his need for a fast, total, visible win, after already spending a year and enormous resources on this invasion. A message promising an easy, complete destruction of the enemy fleet was almost impossible for a king under that kind of pressure to resist. The lie didn't just exploit a strait of water, it exploited an ego and a deadline. Strip away the drama, and Salamis becomes proof of something bigger than one ancient sea battle. The side with more resources doesn't automatically win. The side that understands its opponent's psychology well enough to make the opponent defeat himself often does. The consequences didn't stop with one afternoon. With his navy broken, Xerxes pulled the bulk of his army out of Greece and returned to Asia, leaving a smaller force behind under his general Mardonius. That force was crushed the following year at the Battle of Plataea, and according to tradition, on the very same day, the remaining Persian fleet was destroyed at the Battle of Mycale on the coast of what is now Turkey. Between those two defeats, Persia's attempt to conquer Greece was finished for good. What followed was the golden age of classical Athens, the era of Socrates, of the Parthenon rebuilt from the ashes of the one Xerxes burned, and of a democratic experiment that, however limited by today's standards, planted ideas about citizenship and self-governance that still shape modern political systems across the world. Today, the island of Salamis is a quiet, populated part of modern Greece, home to around 35,000 to 40,000 people, sitting in the Saronic Gulf, just a short ferry ride from Athens. Most visitors passing through barely notice the narrow strait beside it. Few realize that this same calm channel of water is where a divided, outnumbered alliance of city-states, through nothing more than a servant in a rowboat and a perfectly timed lie, changed the direction of Western history. It's worth sitting with that. So much of what came after, the philosophy, the art, the political ideas that still echo through the modern world, may trace back to one small boat rowing across dark water, carrying nothing but a lie precise enough to change the course of history.